She walked onto the plane with quiet confidence, her little boy holding her hand and excitement in his eyes. The flight attendant smiled politely, but some eyes followed her with puzzled stares. A black woman in first class, some passengers, looked twice. Not because she wasn't welcome, but because they had already formed a story in their heads. When she took her seat beside the child, a well-dressed woman across the aisle leaned over and asked with a tight smile, "Is his mother joining us later?" The question hung in the air like a slap. For a moment, there was silence. Others nearby paused their conversations, sensing tension but unsure of its cause. She could have brushed it off. She could have nodded or offered a forced laugh. But instead, she chose a different response, one that would leave the cabin in stunned silence. And then, spontaneous applause. In that one moment, she didn't just stand up for herself, she stood up for every woman who's ever been judged before being known, and every mother whose love and presence has ever been questioned. But what exactly did she say? And how did her quiet strength shift the entire mood of that flight? What happened next not only changed how strangers saw her but left a lasting impact none of them expected. Before we get to her unforgettable reply, let's step back and see how it all began. Because this story is about more than just a plane ride, it's about identity, assumptions, and one powerful response. The day had started like any other. Jasmine, a successful marketing executive from Atlanta, had just wrapped up a major conference on the West Coast. Tired but proud, she was finally heading home with her 6-year-old son, Malik, who had traveled with her for the first time. First class wasn't a luxury for her, it was a reward she had earned through long nights, big presentations, and years of pushing past doubts in boardrooms where she was often the only black woman at the table. So when she booked the tickets, she didn't think twice. At the airport, everything had gone smoothly. She held Malik's hand as they walked through security, picked up a snack for him at the gate, and boarded early thanks to her status. She wasn't thinking about how others might see her. She was thinking about getting Malik settled with his coloring book and making sure he felt calm before takeoff. But from the moment she stepped into the first-class cabin, she noticed the glances. They weren't loud or rude, just subtle pauses, slight confusion, eyes drifting between her and the boy as if trying to put together a puzzle that didn't fit their expectations. She felt it, even if no one said it out loud until that woman did. That single question wasn't just a misunderstanding, it opened something deeper, something Jasmine had experienced more times than she could count. But this time was different, because this time she wasn't going to stay silent. Not for herself and not for Malik. Jasmine glanced at Malik, who was now busy peeling the wrapper off a granola bar, completely unaware of the tension forming around them. She turned her head slowly toward the woman across the aisle, whose expression still held that polite, almost puzzled smile. Before Jasmine could respond, the woman added, "He's just adorable. How long have you been with the family?" A few passengers nearby shifted in their seats, clearly listening. One man even lowered his newspaper slightly, as if he couldn't believe what he'd just heard. Jasmine's heart was racing, not from anger, but from that familiar feeling, a mix of frustration and sadness. She wasn't surprised. This wasn't the first time someone had assumed she wasn't the mother, or that she didn't belong in certain spaces. But being mistaken for a nanny in front of her own child, in first class, was a sting that felt deeper. She knew she had a choice to make. Let it slide and stay comfortable, or speak up and risk turning a quiet flight into something else. Meanwhile, the flight attendant returned to check seatbelts, sensing a slight shift in the mood but not fully aware of what had just happened. Malik tugged at Jasmine's sleeve and asked if he could look out the window. She helped him lean over without breaking eye contact with the woman. In that moment, something was building inside her, not rage, but something stronger, the need to tell the truth in a way that could not be ignored. The hum of the engines grew louder as the plane began to taxi, but the cabin felt oddly quiet. Jasmine could feel eyes on her, even if no one dared to speak. The woman across the aisle adjusted her scarf and turned to her magazine, acting as if the conversation had been casual. But for Jasmine, it wasn't casual, it was personal. She gently smoothed Malik's curls and took a deep breath, her mind spinning through 1,000 memories. Every moment she'd been overlooked in a meeting, every time someone had assumed she wasn't in charge, every time she'd had to prove that she belonged. She glanced around the cabin. A man in a gray suit was whispering to the woman next to him. A young flight attendant gave her a hesitant smile but didn't approach. No one had said anything, yet everyone knew something had just happened. Jasmine's fingers gripped the armrest as she tried to steady herself. She looked at Malik again, now drawing shapes on the foggy window with his finger. He was still innocent to the weight of the moment, but she wasn't, and she couldn't let this moment pass like all the others. Her pulse quickened. Her voice, when she finally spoke, would have to carry more than just her own story. It had to be clear, honest, and undeniable. Every second felt heavier. She turned toward the woman slowly, her expression calm but unreadable. What she was about to say would change the energy in that cabin completely. Just as Jasmine turned to speak, the woman's phone buzzed. She picked it up casually, glanced at the screen, and her face changed, tightening into a mix of disbelief and discomfort. She lowered the phone quickly, but not before Jasmine caught a glimpse of a headline. Asterisk top black executive keynote speaker inspires thousands in LA. And there, right beneath the headline, was a photo of Jasmine herself, standing on a brightly lit stage with Malik beside her, both smiling. The woman's eyes flicked back to Jasmine wider now, unsure. It was clear she'd just connected the dots, but said nothing. She shifted in her seat, suddenly too busy adjusting her seatbelt. Jasmine saw it all happen without a word exchanged, the silent unraveling of assumptions in real time. But the damage had already been done. Then came a voice from behind. "Excuse me, are you Jasmine Carter?" A man in business attire leaned slightly forward from the row behind, his voice quiet but curious. Jasmine turned, nodding gently. "I was at the conference. Your talk on brand storytelling, powerful stuff. And your son? He was amazing up there." His words echoed through the cabin, pulling more attention. The woman across the aisle froze. Now, the moment was no longer private, it had cracked open. Other passengers started glancing between the two women, tension simmering just under the surface. Jasmine hadn't spoken yet, but now, the whole plane seemed to be waiting not just for her words, but for her truth. The spotlight was hers. Again, Jasmine finally spoke, her voice calm but steady. "Yes, I'm Jasmine Carter. And this," she smiled, placing her hand gently on Malik's back, "is my son." The man behind her gave a respectful nod, and a few others leaned back quietly, listening more intently now. She turned to the woman across the aisle and added, "You asked how long I've been with the family. The answer is since I gave birth to him." There was a long pause. The woman's eyes dropped, and her face flushed. She opened her mouth, maybe to apologize, maybe to deflect, but nothing came out. The silence was louder than any words. Then, from somewhere near the front, a quiet clap started. Another joined, and then another. It wasn't wild or dramatic, but it grew one row at a time, a ripple of quiet applause moving through the cabin, not just for Jasmine, but for everything that moment represented. But just as things seemed to settle, Malik tugged at Jasmine's sleeve again. "Mom, can I tell them?" She looked at him, a little confused. "Tell them what?" He held up a lanyard from his backpack, the conference badge they gave him for stepping on stage with her. It had his name, and below it, the words "Junior Keynote Guest." The crowd chuckled softly, but then came the twist. A flight attendant, who had been watching from the galley, stepped forward. "Miss Carter, my daughter was in that audience. She's 10. After hearing you, she told me she wants to be just like you." For a moment, it was no longer about judgment or mistaken identity. It was about impact, unexpected, powerful, and deeply human. Jasmine smiled softly at the flight attendant, touched in a way that words couldn't fully express. "Thank you," she said gently. "That means more than you know." Malik beamed beside her, clearly proud of his mom, but even more excited that strangers were clapping for them on a plane. The woman across the aisle sat quietly, still processing everything. She didn't say anything more, but her expression had changed. Less judgment, more humility. Sometimes, the best apology is silence paired with reflection. As the plane lifted into the sky, the tension dissolved, replaced by a quiet sense of respect. Jasmine leaned back in her seat and wrapped an arm around Malik. She didn't need to prove herself. Her presence, her truth, and the path she had walked spoke louder than any defense ever could. That short exchange in the cabin had sparked something bigger, and awareness, maybe even a shift in perspective for a few people. By the time the flight landed, no one was questioning who Jasmine was. Instead, people smiled warmly. A few even nodded as they passed. The man who had recognized her offered a handshake,